Speaking in a short presentation followed by a panel discussion, please welcome Head of Research and Development at European Travel Commission, Jennifer Iduh. And joining after in a panel will be Head of Visit Iceland at Promote Iceland, Sigríður Dögg, Guðmundsdóttir, Portuguese National Tourism Authority President, Luis Araujo, for a discussion moderated by Skift Global Tourism reporter Rosie Spinks.
Good morning, everybody. I am very excited to be here today to share with you some of the insights and data that the European Travel Commission has been collecting in the European tourism sector during this COVID-19 pandemic. So for those that may not be very familiar with the European Travel Commission, we are a non-for-profit organization. We are based in Brussels, and our main job is to promote Europe as a tourism destination in long-haul source markets. So I think we can get started. So the following graph shows foreign tourist arrivals and overnights from selected destinations across Europe. These are mainly ETC member organizations, and it's important to note here that the destinations have been reporting data on different periods. As you can see, those that have a more positive performance refer to data available up to January-February this year. The sharpest declines clearly correspond to those that have reported data throughout the year to May. In terms of arrivals, we can see how 7 out of 13 reporting countries have registered falls of over 50%, with the sharpest declines observed in Croatia and Cyprus, both based on data to May. So essentially, the effects of the pandemic will be harder on those destinations that not only rely heavily on tourism, but also on international source markets. And although the recovery is projected to start early in 2021, we do not expect to get back to pre-crisis levels until 2023. Now, I would just quickly like to take you through some industry indicators. So the first 4 months of the year, the region saw a 44% decline in international tourist arrivals. Concerning tourism-related jobs, these have been very vulnerable and impacted during the crisis, especially small and medium enterprises, cruise companies, airlines, travel agencies, and many others. And latest research estimates that in 2020, between 14 and 29 million tourism jobs in Europe will be lost. Accommodation statistics are also quite depressed, with a decline in occupancy of 75.2% and of RevPAR of 80.8%. The positive side here is that consumer activity is starting to recover, to pick up, due to relaxed travel restrictions, and the data is also showing a jump for the months of July and August, especially in some Mediterranean destinations. In terms of the outlook, there are many questions, but there is also still a lot of uncertainty. So will there be second wave of cases in destinations? What will the lifting of travel restrictions look like? But what we know for sure is that countries will recover at different paces, of course, depending on the management of the pandemic. And other questions are also, will mass tourism be a shortcut for a fast recovery, or will niche tourism and, let's say, a slower type of tourism become a sort of trend? So tourism as we know it has ceased to exist. And to be able to build the sector that we're all willing to see tomorrow, we need to do this within some pre-existing conditions. So domestic and intra-European markets have now become the only ones available, and they will also be crucial to bring the sector back to life this year. Tourism business now also have to ensure that travelers can enjoy deeper and richer travel experiences while also ensuring that health and safety protocols are in place. Now it's a matter of time to see what tomorrow's traveler will look like and what the outcome of the pandemic will be. So are they willing to return to old habits, or are they more conscious regarding social, economic, and the environmental aspects of tourism? And to the question whether there is a silver lining in this crisis, the answer is yes. We now have the opportunity to build a sector that is more resilient, that is more competitive, and prepared for future crises. And this can be done by reassessing current tourism strategies and building a tourism model that is economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable in the long term. Embracing digitalization and leveraging new technologies will also be key for success. And although in the last years we've seen a shift in tourism strategies more focused on quality over quantity, the question is, will this crisis underpin or, let's say, drive more destinations to adopt this approach? What will happen to traditional products and experiences? So will there be a focus also on a more slower type of tourism, focus more on wellness and health? So these are some questions that remain to create or to forge the path to the tourism that we want to see tomorrow and the tourism we want to leave for future generations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that presentation. And thank you to my panelists for being here today. We're really grateful. So let's start by talking about what's on a lot of people's minds, which is summer. So Iceland came out quite early with an ambitious plan to test every traveler on arrival, and that, from what I can tell, seems to be going quite well. Portugal has also been keen to salvage a summer season, has reopened to EU member states, and starting to reopen a bit further in conjunction with the EU. We're still TBD on an air bridge with the UK. But at the same time, we're seeing some clusters and spikes in some places. So can summer be salvaged? I'll start with you, Louise.
Well, hello, Rosie. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. Yes, and I think Jennifer pointed out very clearly, we have many doubts on top of us, on top of any country. So we thought that the best thing was to think about a restart based on responsibility and transparency. We still think that summer can be saved. We have some data, for instance, in terms of air connectivity, which is basic for us, for Portugal, because almost 95% of our tourists, foreign tourists, come from the plane, and 2/3 of our tourism is from foreigners. And we have almost 40% of the capacity of the flight capacity in July and 50 to 60% in August. So of course we're focusing a lot on the internal market, but we still feel that there is some hope for the future and for this summer for sure.
Sika, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Rosie, and thank you also for having me here. So of course, this has had a huge impact on tourism in Iceland, with tourism being one of the pillar industries here. But we have been very fortunate with how the Icelandic authorities have been successful in tackling the COVID crisis. So we have gained a lot of interest and goodwill because of that. And now 10 airlines have announced that they will be flying to Iceland this year from 40 destinations. So we are optimistic. We are more optimistic for the summer now than we were just a few weeks ago. But of course, things have been changing really fast. So I think, of course, we will not see summer anything close to what we were expecting. But we will see. It will be a better summer than we anticipated.
And Jennifer, I wanted to ask you, are you at all surprised by the sort of fragmented approach that Europe initially took to its reopening? I mean, as we know, this was against the recommendation of the European Commission. We're seeing a little more cooperation now with this next phase of reopening to some non-member states. But I wonder what the legacy of that is. You know, for a lot of Europeans, this crisis is the first time they've crossed the border, so to speak. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's very important to bear in mind that this crisis hits countries differently, and the way it was managed was also different. So therefore, the lifting of travel restrictions will be different across destinations depending on how successful they were managing the spread of the virus. Of course, a unified and a well-consolidated approach would have been the ideal scenario and would have contributed to get the industry going on very quickly, restoring travel confidence, get businesses also opening. That would have been the ideal case, and this is why we strongly support the European Commission's recovery proposal, which was released earlier in May, and which gives indications and recommendations for member states on how to reopen travel again and get tourism starting in 2020. Another very good initiative is the Reopen EU portal with some indications and guidance on the restrictions that are in place by countries. So you're right in this sense, there have been a lot of confusion, and this is why we need to build now a unified and a more solid approach for when the external borders are opened.
Yeah, we were actually speaking before the panel about how I was impressed by that EU reopening portal and its functionality. I wonder though, will this moment have a lasting legacy on how travelers feel about going abroad? You know, will travel feel less seamless in the future, especially in the EU? Or do you think this is a temporary moment of anomaly? Louise, you're shaking your head.
We hope that this new tourism that we want to build is just not a matter of words and just speaking and saying nice things, but we have been through many different crises and all over the last years, and all of these crises have shown how vulnerable the sector is. So we really don't know what crisis we will face tomorrow, but what is certain is that models that are based on mass tourism or uncontrolled tourism growth will no longer be valid. So we need to build a sector that is stronger, that is more resilient, and work together, joining forces in terms of destinations, governments, and policymakers to build a sector that we want to see tomorrow.
Louise, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I totally agree, of course. And we always say that our biggest competitor now is fear. And against fear, that's why we always talk about trust and transparency. Building trust is crucial now in this moment to gain the markets and to gain the tourists. We don't get that without having clear rules. And I think you spoke about the portal from the EU. I think it's a very good solution, but we need to have clear rules on how to go to places and what you can do. We've been working that very hard in Visit Portugal, giving all the information, very clear and very transparent information on what you can do or can't do in Portugal. We've seen a few days ago, there were some spikes around Lisbon. It's just some neighborhoods of Lisbon that they're not touristic destinations. They're not touristic attractions. And Lisbon is suffering as a whole because of this. So clear information and very precise is crucial. And I agree with you, the seamless experience of travelers, which is something we've been dealing it for the past 3 years. How can you move around the country? How can you understand the country? How can the mobility inside a country is crucial right now? And I think it will be much more present in the needs of any tourist, much more present than the safety issue, which I think is very immediate right now, to understand what people are doing and what countries are doing in this area. It will be how easy it is to travel inside the country, and how can I understand what to do and how to travel inside the country.
Thank you for that. So let's start talking about over-tourism, something both Portugal and Iceland have faced, and Skift has written about those challenges. Do you think this crisis may be a sort of reset or an opportunity to approach tourism in a different way, as Jennifer was kind of alluding to earlier? Siga, maybe you can start.
So first, regarding tourism, I sometimes feel that it was a bit unwarranted to connect it to Iceland. The reason was because tourism grew really rapidly for a few years' time, from a really small proportion to 2 million last year. But we are still in a very, very vast country, so tourists are spreading in a really, really big area. So I just wanted to address that. But yeah, I think it will have a positive effect, because I think people will want to avoid crowded places, so they will be more willing to seek out these lesser known but equally beautiful areas and destinations. So I think we will definitely see a positive behavior, which will counteract the over-tourism following this.
And what about in Portugal, Louise?
We launched our strategy in 2017 until 2027, and sustainability is at the center of the strategy. We even have environmental goals. We want 90% of our companies to have waste, energy, and water management measures. And we want to have 90% of our locals inside the urban areas agreeing with the touristic activity. What we're seeing now, and it's quite interesting to see all the reports in the TV and the newspapers about locals that live in old neighborhoods that feel the absence of tourism, that were working for tourism, that had small shops and now are completely empty. I agree that this is a time to stop and rethink about the tourism model for the future. I'll give you an example. I was last Friday in Sintra, at the Pena Palace, which is a beautiful palace that welcomes every day 5,000 people. 5,000 people a day. On Friday, they had 200 people. We were 5 inside the palace. We were greeting each other. So this is wonderful, but this is also not sustainable or viable in the economic part, because that palace needs a lot of investment in terms of keeping it as it is. But I think, and we were discussing this, that this is the time to think of how technology can help us, how data is vital to understand what we can do. And that's why we are so focused that through our innovation center. How can we work with data? And most important, I think we'll go back to the same. How can communication and clear communication for everyone, not just for locals, but also for foreigners, to understand how a city moves, what are the rules inside the city, everything. So I think this is the time to rethink. We don't have situations of over-tourism in the country. We have grown a lot in areas which are not touristic areas, but we think this is the right time. And I think everyone is doing this effort to understand the balance between how many tourists you need and how many tickets you have to sell to keep the monuments on all the attractions in place, and how many people you can have to have a good experience.
Right. And at what point does that number mean that the residential experience, the local experience, begins to deteriorate because of the presence of tourists, which I think is a really good point you made. Jennifer, maybe you can add a sort of more broader European perspective on this question of the over-tourism reset, as we can call it.
Yes, of course, this crisis has somehow softened the worries and their concerns that their way around over-tourism. Obviously, because the sector came to a standstill. This, however, doesn't mean that the problem is over yet. It depends on how things are managed now from both the demand and the supply side. So we're now given an opportunity to do a better job in terms of destination management or carrying capacity. And we will now have a slow recovery, which will not allow for over-tourism, but we need to see how things develop in 2021 and beyond.
Are there any countries or destinations that have implemented some policy or practice or experiment in this time that you've been impressed by or think could be used elsewhere?
What we have seen is that many countries are adopting and changing their strategies. This has been a trend that we've seen in the last couple of years, and that this crisis now comes in handy to adopt this new model, which is based on targeting travelers instead of depending on where they come from, based on their values, their preferences, their hobbies, and their interests. So we're at least at ETC, we changed our marketing strategy. We've seen how other countries' destinations are also implementing this. And the idea is to focus more on quality over quantity. So targeting more, having a more targeted approach towards travelers. And the objective is to generate, contribute to the economic development of destinations, and also to sort of disperse travelers across many different European countries in a more even way.
It seems like our audience is maybe a little more pessimistic than we are. So in answer to the question, will destinations make an effort to be more sustainable? 2/3 said no, the financial models for destinations are too reliant on large numbers of tourists. But in covering this, I have wondered whether the memory of this all disappearing overnight and this kind of idea that maybe tourism isn't as reliant and safe as an economic engine as we thought it was, particularly as climate change progresses, et cetera. I think maybe that will have a legacy. Does anyone have any final thoughts on that?
Well, I think. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Sig.
Thank you, Luis. I think that there was a really strong trend towards this direction in recent years, and on the other hand, I think this will be a stronger demand now that we have to be more sustainable now, and so that is my feeling. At least here in Iceland, we have taken really strong steps towards a more sustainable tourism. And there will be a stronger call for that here domestically, at least, that now we have to use this time. It's like a reset button on the tourism here. And to make sure that we enforce this direction that we have been taking. And we, for example, last year we introduced the tourism capacity indicators. And this is the first time that this has been developed for a whole country, where we want to make sure that the tourism will be sustainable in all regions of Iceland. So I'm more optimistic than the majority I hear.
Yeah, Louis?
Can I just say something? I think I agree with some of the chat that say that we agree there is a risk of accelerating in order to compensate the negative results of this year. This is a very big risk. Over the past 4 months, we've been giving a lot of online training, a lot of digital information to our companies, our workers. More than 40,000 people have been trained in Portugal over these past 3 months, digital training. And the two areas which we focused more were digital marketing and sustainability. And it's incredible to see the response from the companies because they understand that this is a time and the new times will be very demanding. We think about sustainability, but we're very much focused on how much plastic we use, how much disposable things are given to us in a hotel. So it's also part of our responsibility to demand to these companies and to destinations that they act effectively. And this is the balance that we need to reach. I'm confident, at least in Portugal. I think companies are being prepared and discussing this very clearly over the past months.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's my last question. Let's finish on something that's particularly newsy right now, which is the future of the American traveler in Europe. So obviously, it's not looking great right now. I wrote a story, I think, last week about how this reliably upward growth of American outbound tourism over the last few years could really be thrown into disarray here. I think the big question is, again, is this a temporary moment, or does this have, does the American traveler being unwelcome abroad, including in Europe, which is, a major market, does that have more lasting effects?
I would like to add that the future indeed doesn't look great, especially if we consider that the US is Europe's largest source market and also the second largest tourism spender after China. We really do not expect international travel from the US in the coming months. And it's also important to consider because there are some travel restrictions from countries with a high rate of infection. So this depends, of course, on how they are able to keep the virus under control. And what this implies for destinations is that now we've been forced to look for other alternatives, explore other ways of targeting travelers and markets to fill in this sort of void that has been left by the US travel market.
Any other thoughts?
About the US market, I think it's incredible how it grew to Portugal. It came from being in the 20th position to be in the 6th position, almost in the top 5 for tourists in Portugal, thanks to air connectivity. Many companies have started traveling to the US. We think it will come again. And I think it's the same as the air bridges and everything. It has to do with trust and responsibility. If we always focus on how bad the other country is or how many spikes it has, and if you don't take into account the broadest picture of each country's situation, like Portugal, for instance, and you mentioned at the beginning about the air bridges with the UK and everything, you can't just focus on one particular asset or aspect, because it changes, it's variable. You have to see what the country is doing and how effective they are, not only the country that issues the tourists, but also the country who is receiving them. Because once again, it's based on responsibility and both responsibility. So I think that very, very soon, and we understand the importance of the US market to Europe, not only to Portugal. To Portugal, it's very important, but for everyone. If internally, inside the European Union, we have a good control with balanced public health measures issued by every country, a massive testing, which is what Portugal is doing right now, and strict scientific assessment, we always say this, surely we will be ready to welcome anyone. And I think that's the most important right now, building trust in the entire market.
Thank you for that. I think we're actually just out of time, unfortunately. I'm sure we could go on, but I want to thank all three of you for joining us today and for your candor and answers. We really appreciate your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.